Everyone, welcome to part two of our bowl recap show. As always, I'm Dan.
No, I'm Joe.
Uh, Joe, as a avid, lifelong Auburn fan, I hate to give Alabama a lot of credit, and I really hate to give individual Alabama players a lot of credit. But I'm very proud of the way that Bryce Young and Will Anderson handled themselves and this Alabama Crimson Tide football team. That was an excellent showing they had against Kansas State, who was a very motivated, solid football team. They're the only teams to beat TCU, a TCU team who now beat undefeated Michigan and did it in a very convincing manner. Kansas State, very disciplined. They're tough to score a lot of points on. They got great running attack, a lot of really smart, heady players, including Kurt Warner's son at tight end. And they got out to a 10-0 lead against Alabama. Deuce Vaughn had an 80-yard touchdown run against them. And instead of, all the Alabama fans thinking, oh, no, this is 2008 USC all over again. This is 2013 Oklahoma all over again. Us missing out on a chance with a national championship caliber team missing out a chance to win a championship with a national caliber team, laying an egg in a BCS in a New Year's Six type bowl game. Instead, Alabama responded, and Joe, they put up I think 38 consecutive points against TCU, and Bryce Young showed why he's going to be the number one overall pick. The first touchdown pass that he threw was just a thing of beauty. He's sitting there, he's moving in the pocket. He checks down to about his fifth different option and hits him in the one place that he could in the back of the end zone. It was the kind of play that just makes you be like, man, if I had a first-round draft pick, I'm trading up to get him if I need a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many times, throughout his career, you think about it in the Sugar Bowl against Kansas State, where he just was so impressive. He was big in big moments, even this year in their losses against Tennessee and LSU. He had his numbers. He wasn't really the reason they lost, especially against Tennessee. And so when I look back on his career, I think about him being just a joy to watch. Really, the last few years, I've really enjoyed watching Alabama's offense. Whereas what used to frustrate me is always felt like they won with subpar quarterback play. Mm-hmm. And so I have enjoyed seeing them have better quarterbacks.
Absolutely. I mean, you think of the early times of Nick Saban, you had John Parker Wilson, then you had Greg McElroy, great analyst, pretty good quarterback. And then it felt like it's kind of gone upward slowly. I thought McElroy was better than Wilson. Then you get A.J. McCarron. A.J. McCarron's a little step up from McElroy. Then you move on. It goes down for a little bit there. Jake Coker and I can't remember who the other one was. Yeah, and Blake Sims. And Blake Sims was, good athletic quarterback. But then all of a sudden, then you get in and you get Tua. Then you get Jalen Hurts. That sounds even better, right? Then you get Tua. And then Bryce Young's above all of them. It's crazy. I mean, it's just kind of this little, building block of great quarterback play. And, he's just one of the more instinctive quarterbacks I've ever seen and one of the more patient ones. And he only runs when he really needs to. And he's always looking downfield. And he doesn't make many mistakes. And some of the best things you'll ever see him do is avoid getting a sack or avoid getting an intentional grounding. And he's one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think so. And I just feel like he's going to have a really good mindset in professionalism that will serve him well at the next level. Like, he's the type of guy that I'm not concerned about with the intangibles either about taking him, with a top 5 pick.
Absolutely not. I mean, I hate it so much that the Saints, who we're going to talk about later, don't have a first round draft pick where they could trade away a whole draft for a quarterback because he might be one that's worth it.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's true.
Joe, going to the, sticking in the SEC West, really great end of the season for Alabama. I think that, showed a lot of, ability of Nick Saban's players buying in, not letting the fact they didn't make a college football playoff in their season and they enjoyed their Sugar Bowl and did well. Well, on the flip side, Ole Miss was a team that going into the Alabama game They had one really disappointing loss to LSU where they blew the lead. I was at that game. But everything was still in front of them at that point. They could still win the SEC West, go to the college football playoff, and Baton Rouge be forgotten about. They lose a close one to Alabama. All of the, rumors about Lane Kiffin going to Auburn, I think that started before the Alabama game, start really hitting off. And Ole Miss loses 5 out of their last 6 games, and a couple of them really embarrassingly. I mean, the Arkansas game was awful. The Mississippi State game, I mean, they had all these yards and couldn't, weren't really focused until the end. And, you felt like that they were still the better team than Mississippi State. And then this bowl game was just the ultimate comedy of errors. And it was probably the worst coach game I've seen by Lane Kiffin. I really thought that probably in his tenure at Ole Miss, the Auburn game last season was his worst one, when he just kept slamming his head against the wall and going for it on 4th down, when all he had to do was kick field goals and he would have beaten Auburn. They did it, 4 times in the second half and got shut down every single one of them, which at least those were on Auburn's side of the field. This one, I watched in the first half where twice inside his own 20, he went forward on 4th down, including on his own 11, and a really obvious and terribly executed fake punt. And pretty much all these times they were stopped. I think by the end of the game, he went for it, 8 or 9 times on 4th down, and maybe got 3 of them. And just the team didn't look like they cared. They didn't want to be there. And it was a really disappointing performance, and just leaves me really sour taste in my mouth about where things are going with Lane Kiffin and what's he going to do to turn it around.
Yeah, a few thoughts. I think with the 4th down attempts, that level of aggressiveness, to me it was almost like a defiant level of aggressiveness. It's like, I'm just going to do this anyway, even though y'all think I'm crazy for doing it, just because I can.
Yeah.
So I felt that to a degree. As far as just kind of how the season went and how it ended, I think that the issue with Ole Miss is when you come away with an 8-5 record with a new quarterback and a lot of new players from the transfer portal, I think at the end of the day, they were about a reflection of what their record says they are, about an 8-4, 8-5 team, talent-wise. But I think the issue is how it played out, and with the front-loaded schedule and how they finished, how they end on a sour note in the bowl game. It's this notion of flirting with success, of getting people excited, and then for it to be a tailspin with all the distractions. I think that's the issue. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on them next year, Dan. When you look at the schedule, and people are going to probably be surprised to hear me say this, there is no guarantee they're going to a bowl game next year. That schedule is horrendous. You've got to go to Georgia. You've got to go to Auburn against Hugh Freeze. They'll be fired up. You got to go to State. I mean, 6 wins is not something you can take lightly next year.
Hey, Joe, how about one of their opening games, which last season no one would have thought anything other than, hey, party in New Orleans. How about a trip to Tulane to take on the Green Wave right now? That doesn't look like a guaranteed win by any stretch of the imagination right now. That's going to be a tough road trip.
No, not at all. At Tuscaloosa, too. I forgot about that. You've got to go. I can't remember exactly how it plays out, Dan, but I think they have a stretch maybe at Tulane, at Alabama, host LSU, host Arkansas, at Auburn, at Georgia. It's hard to find wins when you kind of look at that stretch.
Yeah, and that's going to be tough. I mean, you feel like if Lane could have gotten 10 wins this season, he could have maybe afforded to have a year where that schedule just kind of bogged him down. But he's made so many people mad this offseason. He's going to have to find a way to get 9 wins out of this, I think, to make people happy next year. And that's going to be a tall order with that schedule.
Right. Yeah, you assume you'll lose to Georgia and Bama, probably LSU, but you've got to win those swing games, and you probably need to beat LSU.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one. And I mean, I saw he's been picking up a little bit of momentum on the recruiting trail in the last few days, but definitely a tough end to the season. And we'll see his level of commitment and what he can do next season, because he is bringing back a lot of players. He's bringing back Judkins. He's bringing back Jackson Dart. He should have young receivers getting a little bit better. He should have a fully healthy Trig for next season. There's a lot of talent coming back. You're right. That is a brutal schedule, and this year's schedule was much easier than the one coming up next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you wish you could trade schedules, but you can't. And so it's going to be a big test. And now that he's got that huge contract, nobody's going to be patient.
That's right. Yeah, you don't get patience with $9 million a year, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Joe, speaking of underperforming on a big contract, Lane Kiffin isn't the only one who got the inked deal and then phoned it in. How about Mark Stoops just having an epic collapse to Kentucky this year that ends with the Iowa Hawkeyes shutting you out and scoring over 20 points? Joe, I don't think Iowa scored more than 20 points since the corn started growing in Iowa, like with how bad their offense has been. Now, granted, I think a couple of those were defensive touchdowns, but Iowa's offense did a lot more than Kentucky's offense. And I know that we're a little bit sad in that game. What an embarrassing look for Kentucky, who, like Ole Miss, was kind of the talk of the SEC in the early season right here, and ended up having, what is I think, objectively a pretty poor season.
And that was ironically Ole Miss's best win on the schedule when it played out.
You remember how exciting, how big of a deal it was when that game happened? Kentucky and Ole Miss, it was life-changing.
Mm-hmm. And Ole Miss really should have won that, if not for that late turnover, because Kentucky had a touchdown, that was called back for the penalty. So, you look back at the Kentucky season, and they definitely, had it play out similarly, for them as well. I know they've got a good transfer quarterback coming in, but that they definitely have to be discouraged.
Yeah, that was a really bad look for Kentucky to end the season. And, to be honest, I think it's kind of a bad look for Will Levis, because he opted out of that game, and I've been saying I think he's the most overrated quarterback I've ever seen. I think he almost owed it to draft scout to play against a great defense like Iowa, have a good game, and show why he's up there. Because right now, why is he a top 10 draft pick? I want someone to actually explain that to me. And I haven't heard anything. I just hear everyone's like, oh, he's got a great grade. But why? Why does he have a great draft grade? I don't understand it.
Well, I want to say I saw something as recent as the last week that had him as a top 5 mock draft after Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. He was I think the next quarterback. And I'm kind of surprised too. I mean, all I can tell you, Dan, is that maybe, somebody thinks you get him in the right system, he could perform well. I will say that every year, it always seems like we're notorious for seeing that, prospect that seems like they're kind of the Blaine Gabbert of the draft. There's always that one.
Yeah, I think he's definitely going to fit the bill on that. The Trey Lance, who still hasn't played it down yet for the 49ers, but was such a big deal, coming out of North Dakota State. At least he had success in college. I don't really know what the most success you can say Will Levis did. I guess beating bad Florida teams. I don't really know. But speaking of one of those other quarterbacks you mentioned, Joe, I thought that C.J. Stroud was excellent against Georgia. I mean, that was a great performance. What an amazing game that was. You have the field goal that goes wide left just as the clock strikes midnight in the Eastern time zone. I mean, that was truly one of the more incredible college football playoff semifinals we've had. Both of them ended up being really good, but that one was epic. And, I thought it was a great look for Ohio State. They got dominated by Michigan, but they showed in that game that they were one of the 3, 4, top 5 most talented teams in college football. And then when they put it all together, they were world beaters. And what made it even more impressive is how many people they were without. They were without Jackson Smith and Jigba. They were without Travian Henderson. I think Mayan Williams got injured in that game at some point. And then, of course, Marvin Harrison is dominating. and an assassin goes out and takes his head off, and what I thought was really should have been a targeting call that kind of changed the game. And what made me more mad about that play than them not calling targeting was the fact that it happened, because to me it looked really intentional, and Marvin Harrison Jr. couldn't be stopped by Georgia defense up to that point.
Yeah, I mean, they win the game with him. Like, it probably doesn't get as close, and even if it did, I think that last drive is a lot different. They're probably attempting a much closer field goal, if not getting a touchdown, if he's in the game.
I think so too. Well, and you think about it, if they call that targeting, then Ohio State has 1st and goal with a chance to not go up by 6, but to go up by 10. And what ended up happening was they had to kick a field goal there. Then Stetson Bennett makes the game-winning drive and gets up by a point. And then Ohio State makes their drive with 54 seconds, but, misses the field goal.
Mm-hmm. But that's true. It all kind of, comes back to, haunt them. But you're right. It should not have played out that way.
Yeah. But, I'm not going to take anything away from Stetson Bennett, because he played an excellent game. And kind of like he did last year against Alabama, when it mattered in the 4th quarter, he played great football. There were stretches during the game in Ohio State and some in the 2nd quarter, a little bit in the beginning of the 3rd quarter, where he didn't play that great. But in the 4th quarter, he played excellent. I think he scored 3 touchdowns in the 4th quarter, and it was just really – he did a great job and made some really great passes.
Yeah, I mean, he showed out then when it mattered. I think just had maybe 1 or 2 completions in that entire 4th quarter. And I think that Georgia all year had won most games pretty easily in lopsided affairs. And so I kind of came away feeling like this was their mulligan, like this was the gift game where, they were, I think, the better team, but, they needed some things to just go perfectly their way to win this. And, we might look back and see, that was just, the tough game that it seems like all championship teams have to overcome at some point.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, every team has got to play a game where they get the other team's best shot. Maybe they make some mistakes, but they find the moxie in them to win it. And Georgia definitely did that. And that was a championship type win against a very hungry, extremely talented Ohio State team.
Exactly. Well said.
And Joe, the last thing I want to say about this game is there's been a lot of people, myself included, that a lot of times has said that Kirby Smart's not the best in-game coach. He makes some bad decisions during games. You think about his fake field goal against Alabama. I think there was a fake field goal again against I think it was against LSU that was really bad. There's all kinds of things he's been made fun of in the past. But what he did against Ohio State, when Ohio State was doing the fake punt right there, that they got the 1st down, but he identified it, where at least the people up top got it to him, and he sprinted and he got that timeout in time. That may have also won him the game, because Ohio State was going to succeed on that play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was definitely crucial at the right time.
Yeah, I was really impressed by Kirby right there. That was great coaching. Joe, speaking of really good coaching, I'm a huge James Franklin fan. I know a lot of Penn State fans feel like maybe he hasn't accomplished that much there, which to me is crazy, being that he has now 5 10-win seasons there. But I thought that was a huge win for him over a really good Utah team right there. You and I both, I think, picked Utah to win this game, because we thought about what Utah did last year against Ohio State, the way they killed USC, and how they had that great run at the end of the season. Well, Penn State's a team that the only thing they did was they got beat badly by Michigan and lost to a really good Ohio State team and was beating them in the 4th quarter. But Penn State, I think, showed why they were a team that if you had a 12-team playoff would be one that could win 1 or 2 games by really exerting their dominance with the run game, with the freshman combination of Nick Singleton and then Datron Allen really doing a lot of Katron Allen really doing a lot of work. And then Sean Clifford, I thought, having a really great last game and what I think is a very underrated quarterback. It's funny to me that Will Levis is so overrated, and in my mind, Sean Clifford's so underrated. There's a reason that Sean Clifford never gave up that starting job to Will Levis, by the way. And they showed it in what was a really great beatdown of Utah, and one that even included Nick Singleton scoring a touchdown on the old school wing T formation.
Yeah, I mean, that was an impressive game for Penn State. You look back at their season, they go 11-2. Both their losses, extremely respectable losses. In some degree, I know that the result of some of their games played out differently from Alabama, but it kind of reminded me of kind of the Big Ten version of what Alabama did this year. You
Yeah,
go 11-2, and you just have like two losses that most teams would have lost to those two teams this year.
absolutely. And I mean, having seen Penn State in person 2 years in a row, Franklin's really got it going right there with the level of talent he has. And I mean, it was, they're going to have a chance in a 12-team playoff to make some noise. And I'm glad that he got his extension. And I think that he is going to do great things for Penn State to come. And I think there's a chance that you may see him hoisting a national championship within the next 5 years, calling it early.
I mean, he's definitely going to be a factor.
Yeah. Joe, speaking of being a factor, not someone that I would have really thought of, but suddenly things are going the right way for Florida State football for the first time in a long time under Mike Norvell. You think about it, until this season, which ended with Florida State getting a win over Oklahoma to get to 10 wins, it had been since, the third to last year that Jimbo Fisher was there when they did that. I mean, we're talking 2014 is probably the last time that Florida State had a 10-win season, when Jameis Winston led them to the championship game. They lost against Ohio State. Since then, Florida State football has been abysmal. And, a lot of it was offensive line related play. And they've gone through, of course, Jimbo bolted and went to A&M. Then they hired the guy from Oregon that lasted less than 2 years. I can't even think of his name right now.
Willie Taggart.
Yeah. And then, Mike Norvell, really huge hire out of Memphis. I'm glad they gave him time, because this was his third year. His first 2 years of Florida State looking pretty rough. And a lot of people are wondering, why did we hire this guy over Deion Sanders? We could have had Deion. He wanted to be our guy. He could have led our program. And I get a lot of credit to Mike Norvell. He goes in, he gets that huge win against LSU to begin the season. Things are really trending up. Then they have that, they lose to Wake Forest. They lose to Clemson in a close game. And things just, they lose 3 games in a row, but then they end the season by playing their best football. They beat Florida. They beat Oklahoma. They showed out to end this season, and I think that was a huge deal for them to get to 10 wins, because suddenly Clemson is not the monster that's just lording over the ACC like it has been. Yes, they won the ACC again this season, but they looked really vulnerable. And if you watch that game against Tennessee the other night, and you're Florida State, looking at the fact that you were pretty close to beating them this year, you got to be licking your chops next season saying, this is our chance. We got Jordan Travis coming back. We got a really good receiver, Williams, coming back. Suddenly, in my mind, I think the Seminoles are 1A to 1B to Clemson next year, and are definitely a real competitor to win the ACC.
They've got a formidable chance. And I think that it's also a case study, and maybe, being patient with the coach. Maybe you have a coach that's just won 6 or 7 games the first couple of years, and maybe people aren't that excited, but given that 3rd or 4th year, and then it may pay dividends, opposed to, just automatically moving on to somebody else.
Absolutely. Here's hoping that Auburn gives Hugh Freeze a little bit of time and they don't jump the gun again. I do think it was the right idea to get rid of Harsin, but this is a great example of someone that, Mike Norvell lost to Jacksonville State last year. They had one of the more embarrassing moments in college football where they gave up that last second, Hail Mary play to Jacksonville State, and a Florida State player proposes to his girlfriend cheerleader after they lost the game because he wasn't even aware that they had lost the game. That's how bad this and inconceivable this loss was. That happened to Mike Norvell last year. They didn't make a bowl game, but Florida State held on to him. They let him make amends this year, and he did it with a great season, and they have all their stars, including Jordan Travis, back for the next season. So good luck for Florida State, and things are looking up for chop time.
Yeah, they're doing a lot better than Florida at the moment.
Absolutely. And speaking of Florida, well, they lose to Oregon State 33-0 in a bowl game. That was awful.
Yeah, I mean, Oregon State's kind of one of those trendy teams for next year. I don't know how they'll do. Being the hunted opposed to the hunter, but I mean, they really a trendy team in the Pac-12.
That's right, Joe. Speaking of trendy teams, I thought the Mississippi State win their bowl game was it was beautiful because they took on Illinois. They played Illinois style football. It was ugly, 10-10 going into the very end. It was 10-3 beginning the fourth quarter, and Will Rogers had a pretty rough game going into that. Made some really good throws at the end, including that touchdown pass where that was a tight window. The guy barely got his foot down. Really good throw. And the ending to it was just so perfectly pirate. They had the pirate helmets on the side. You get down to the 1 yard line and you think they're just going to run it in. But then they kneel it and you're like, oh man, this is some goofy Mike Leach stuff. But they make the field goal. In my mind, I was like, does any Mississippi State fan want them to not just run it in right now? They're running the ball so good. But no, they take a 5-yard loss and kick a field goal, which anyone that's ever watched Mississippi State football knows that field goals are far from certainties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even a chip shot or a close range field goal.
Yeah, but that was a big win for them, and over a good Big Ten team, I thought that Illinois was one of the better teams in the Big Ten this year.
Yeah, I mean it was really impressive, and I think that winning a game like that, you saw the raw emotion and the tribute to the coach, and so it was really cool to see Mississippi State be able to win that game, and I think that the players seem to be really rallying behind Zach Arnett.
I think so too, Joe. I thought that was a great move for them to hold on to Zach Arnett, and I think that I'd like to see what he can do. This young guy getting his first opportunity, but he definitely scored an A in his first game, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, Joe. Speaking of A plus, I'm really excited about this national championship game. TCU and Georgia. Getting to see my little cousin Jack, who we've had on the show many times. Going to have him on next week, hopefully, after he goes to the game. He's going to be at the national championship game, so the Hypnotoads take on Georgia. Joe, this is the biggest mismatch on paper that we've had in the national championship game for the entire time we've had the college football playoff. Georgia's favored by 12.5 points right now. My not lock of the week, because I'm certainly not saying this is the lock, but my value lock of the week, if you're looking to place a little wager on the championship game, you get really good money on TCU. Right now, I think it's plus 330, which means if you bet $1, you'd win $3.30. I think that's a good pick on TCU based on the way they're playing right now. I mean, they keep doing things that nobody thought they could do. Okay, well, you beat Oklahoma, but they're not any good. Kansas, you can't beat Kansas in the most lit Kansas atmosphere ever. All right, good, you got them. Kansas State, they're just tough. They're gritty. You can't beat them. All right, got them. Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy, well, they're the ones that know how to do it in the Big 12 now. You're not going to beat Mike Gundy when you get a big – nope, they got Mike Gundy. Well, Texas is just so talented. I mean, you can't beat Texas. They're so much better than you are. Look, they got Bijan Robinson. What did Bijan Robinson get in that game, Joe? Like 28 yards. I mean, they dominated him on defense. And then they finally lose the game to Kansas State, which, by the way, I still don't think they lost. I think that, they scored a touchdown there and it was a bad call. But besides the point, you can't beat Michigan. Michigan dominated Ohio State. On the defensive line and the offensive line, they just got bigger, badder boys than you do. And you don't have a chance against them. Like, Harbaugh's got the best lines in America. Well, what did they do? They were able to run it a lot with Condre Miller. Max Duggan could still run and get everything you wanted to. And they exploited what was, I believe, the number 2 scoring defense in America behind Georgia and Michigan. And, Joe, this is the last final test right here. Every time we say they can't do it, and they have, it's hard to say they can't do it.
Yeah, it's a game where I think most people are going to say that Georgia kind of had that get-right game where they're lucky to get past Ohio State. And then now we're going to see them against a team that they're clearly better than talent-wise, and TCU kind of impose their will and win going away. And
That's
I could
what
see
everybody's
that
going to say. Yep, that's what everybody's going to say.
Everybody's going to say that. And I could see that happening. There's a part of me that could absolutely see them winning by 15 to 20 points.
I could see
However,
it.
I will say that there's something about the short turnaround, not having 3 or 4 weeks to prepare for this game, that I could see it being somewhat fluky and unpredictable. With TCU's track record, like you alluded to, all season being able to stand up to every test. Why is this any different? This team has nothing to lose. They're a resilient team with a resilient quarterback. They play the way, people love to celebrate with college football with a passion, even in this NIL era. And so I could see them making the game close. Another factor I will say that I could see lending it to a closer game is I always feel like these national championship games are set up kind of similar to the Super Bowl. There's a longer halftime, a lot of stoppage time. Like, these games are a lot different than regular season games. Like, they go over 4 hours. And I think that could be somewhat of a curveball for Georgia as well. Even though they were there last year, these are a lot of new players who were not starting last year.
Joe, that's a good point. I've identified in my mind the most important player in the game, and it's Quinn Johnson for TCU. You looked at what Marvin Harrison Jr. was able to do against that Georgia secondary, including picking on Keely Ringo, who, by the way, was the one who had the game-winning pick 6 against Alabama last year. He got brutalized by Marvin Harrison until he got taken out of the game. Quinn Johnson seems like someone that TCU can exploit against this Georgia defense. And here's my number, Joe, 150 yards. If he can get more than 150 yards receiving, I think TCU wins. But you're going to have to hit him. You're going to have your go-to receiver have that kind of game for you to have a chance. And by the way, once he gets 100 yards, Johnson better start watching everywhere he looks, because they're going to try and blindside him and take his head off.
Yeah, that's definitely a legitimate concern. I think, at the end of the day, I have to lean Georgia. I can't imagine a scenario. I'll say this. I feel like there's multiple ways Georgia could win this game. Like, I could see them winning this game ugly, or I could see them winning this game going away. Whereas for TCU, I feel like, everything just has to go perfectly.
Yeah.
And I think that I have to give Georgia the edge.
Yeah, I mean, you got to give Georgia the edge, Joe. I mean, they are better everywhere, except for at quarterback. I would give the edge to Duggan, and I would say that Quinn Johnson's the best receiver in the game. Maybe outside of Brock Bowers. I can't say that anybody's better than Brock Bowers, but Brock Bowers is a tight end. Let's just say that Brock Bowers is the best offensive player, Quinn Johnson the best receiver. But, I would say that Kondre Miller is better than any Georgia running back, but the problem is Georgia's got 3 players that are almost as good as Kondre Miller at running back. So, that's the thing, is that TCU's got a lot of great players, but Georgia has 2 of every single kind of great player. I do lean Georgia in this one, Joe, but I think there is a real chance that TCU can win this game. I look at it as, I think Georgia wins this game like 38-17, or TCU wins. I don't think that Georgia's going to win this one in a close one. This TCU team just has too much magic, man. They keep pulling it out in all these close ones. They're battle tested. I look for it to either be a Georgia beatdown or TCU has one more miracle in them.
Have we had a blowout, I guess, outside of Oregon and Ohio State, that first playoff finals? I'm trying to think if there's actually been a blowout. I feel like every game outside of that has been within 2 touchdowns of 1 possession.
Alabama beat Ohio State, and in the championship game, Clemson beat Alabama really badly.
That's right.
And Alabama beat Ohio State pretty badly 2 years ago.
That's right. You're right. Okay. So we have, I guess, seen some blowouts, because I was trying to imagine that playing out. I mean, I'll say this. The interesting subplot, too, is you'll either have probably the most unlikely national championship team in TCU, or the most unlikely two-time national championship quarterback in Stetson Bennett.
Absolutely. And like I said, I'm happy for either one of them. They both deserve it. And I thought they were both much more deserving Heisman Trophy finalists than Caleb Williams, which I think is bared out on the field. Joe, speaking of people that probably should have won the Heisman Trophy, how about Trevor Lawrence right now, switching to the NFL for a second, has the Jags on the verge of making the playoffs? What a great turnaround he's had in his second year.
Yeah, I mean, Doug Peterson, phenomenal coach. Never thought the Eagles should have fired him. He was a great hire for Jacksonville. And, they're taking on a Titans team that's lost, I think, 6 in a row to fall apart at the end of the season.
The only good news is if you're a Tennessee fan, which means you may also be a Tennessee Vols fan, you can see Josh Dobbs start for the Titans, and what could be a really great moment for the Volunteers, especially with the pending entry of Hendon Hooker in the NFL. So we'll see if Josh Dobbs can get it done against T-Law, and which will be a big game to decide that division in the AFC.
Yeah, Saturday night.
And Joe, I also want to say too, the Saints. We mentioned the Eagles. They went in and they beat the Eagles 20-10. Got a pick six at the very end by Marcus Lattimore. Their defense showed out again. And I'm just so disappointed that all of this was so too little, too late. They even go up to Cleveland in the coldest game they've ever played, and they win in frigid Cleveland. And they do all these things at the end of the season, but all they had to do was get one first down against Tampa Bay and do the right thing, and they'd be sitting here going to the playoffs, and now they're out of it.
Yeah, and they had some other winnable games, too, that they lost, like at Pittsburgh against a young starter and Kenny Pickett, and some other games that, that they easily should have won. And I think that it just took some time for this new coaching staff to kind of learn how to win games in the NFL. And I think that it's a disappointment because how good the defense is.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like this defense is wasted. And it's sad. And I'll tell you what else is really sad was the DeMar Hamlin injury. The only thing I want to say about this is I'm praying for him as you are. And it's just so weird to see a play like that seems so innocuous have such a devastating effect on someone.
Mm-hmm. Right. Still, can't believe it. And like you said, thoughts and prayers to him, his family, and just thinking of him.
That's right. And with that, we will see everyone next week. Thank you for listening to the show. Check out all of our episodes on Spotify, and also follow us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.